Hello, it's Alexander. Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to be doing something a little different. I'm going to be making a wine bottle tote. You know, for the wine. This is an easy project that anyone really can do. Plus, it means that you can test out your quilting skills, because it is a quilted wine tote, because I like to quilt things. Plus, it gets you to use some of the scraps up you have in your home, and I know you have scraps. This video is going to be fairly in-depth. I'm going to be taking you through the pattern making part, the calculations of math, you name it, I'm going from start to finish. So if it does seem a bit long for something so easy, I really want to get you to, learn and sew along with me. Without further ado, let's get right into the math and the calculations. The first thing we have to decide is really the shape. Here I am just drawing out a general shape of what I'm looking for. There will be a few measurements from the bottle itself we'll need to take. One will be the circumference. That is the measurement around the entire bottle. Two will be the height. We'll need to know how high this particular bottle is. And lastly, we'll need to know the base, right across the base. Starting with the circumference, this bottle looks to be about 10 1/4 inches all the way around. Now, each wine bottle is slightly different, so if you're planning to follow along, measure your wine bottle at home. This is a rosé bottle. It should be generally a standard size. Now that we have that measurement, we need the height of the bottle. Measuring from the base right up to the top, this bottle looks to be 11 3/4 inches tall. Again, most wine bottles are about standard. You may want to measure at home just to double check. Now, centering the measuring tape best as possible across the bottom, this wine bottle looks to be about 3 inches wide. Now, I'm just drawing a slightly bigger diagram of what I'm trying to do, and will let me do some calculations next to this. Okay, people, it's time to do some math. We know the bottle is 11 3/4 high. We have to think about the box base and how far the handle will go over the wine bottle itself. So let's take some measurements. I think the wine handle should go 2.5 inches above the wine bottle. This makes it easy to grip. Plus, we also have to think of the box bottom as I'm pointing to here. We need to figure out how big that box bottom is going to be. We know that the base is 3 inches wide. So we need to take 3 inches divided by 2, which is 1.5. And then we have to add the seam allowance, which is 1/2 inch. P.S. Throughout this project, I'll be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, unless noted. So that means we need to add 2 inches to the base. So 11 3/4 plus 2 inches equals 13 3/4. We also have to think about how far the handle needs to go up, as mentioned before. I'm just drawing the wine bottle here just to give some reference. I'm also here going to add an extra 1/4 inch just because 13 3/4 is an ugly number. I'm going to add it as 2.5 inches. So that means 14 inches plus 2.5 inches equals 16.5 inches. That is how tall the fabric needs to be. Now it's time to work on how wide the fabric panel needs to be. So this is the area we're going to be doing. We have the total circumference, which is 10 1/4 inches. So let's write that down, 10 1/4 inches. I'm going to add an extra 1/4 of an inch just to make it, again, less ugly. So that makes it 10.5 inches. Now we have to add the seam allowances on both sides, which is 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch. That brings us to 11.5 inches. Then I'm also going to add 1 inch just for wiggle room, because we do not want the wine bottle to be super snug in there so it wouldn't be able to get in and out easily. That would make it 12.5 inches. And just because I'm going to add an extra 1/2 inch just so it divides in half easy. So that's 13 inches divided by 2, which equals 6.5 inches. So the total width is going to be 6.5 inches. Now that we had all the measurements done, it was time to go to our tracing paper and trace out the pattern. Here is my trusty Pellon tracing paper. I like the Pellon tracing paper because it's easy to work with, you can sew it if you need, and it cuts really well. As I'm showing here, we need a piece 6.5 inches wide by 16.5 inches long. As you can see, I have this on the fold. This comes in handy later. Here I am drawing my starting guideline on a 90-degree angle to the fold edge. Now I'm going in from the folded edge 16.5 inches and drawing a line, making sure that it makes or is at least straight. Then connecting the two lines on a 90-degree angle. Next, I am going to draw a line 3 1/4 down from my first line, and then another line down 3 1/4 from that. The total of those two 3 1/4 measurements will equal the 6.5 we need. This also gives me a great center line to work from, as seen. Now I just need to find the placement of the bottle, the top of the bottle. So I'm measuring up the 11 3/4 that we got from the original measurement of the bottle we did. Now we have to make a reference point for the curves. I went down 2 inches. This will expose the top of the bottle just enough. Now that those 2 inches have been marked, I'm just going to mark a line right across. Again, this will give me the reference point for the curves. Again, noted here, I came down 2 inches. Now we have to think about how wide we want the strap. I went for 1 1/4 inch. 1 1/4 plus 1 1/4 equals 2.5 inch wide strip. I think that would be easy to handle and will look nice proportionally. I should mention that it's 1 1/4 and 1 1/4 on either side of the center line. That will give us our 2.5 inch strip as shown here.
Now it's time to work on the curves. I'm using one of these architect templates for my curves using a 3.5-inch circle. Now if you do not have one of these architect's templates, you could use a mug, glass, bowl, pop can, whatever you have that's a nice round circle. I'm putting the circle edge on the handle side and then going around and tracing around. This gives me a gentle curve that will work well, as you can see here. Now that that's done, I'm just making an opening reference section on the body of the wine tote. Then, we just need to cut everything out. I'm using a rotary cutter. It just makes things easy. We are going through 2 layers of the Pellon tracing paper. 2 layers, remember. Now that you've done all your cutting, you should have a piece of template or pattern that looks like this. A long, dumbbell-like shape. This is one of the joys of working on the fold.
Now, once our pattern is done, it's time to work on fabric. Again, this is a great opportunity to use up some of the scraps you have at home. I certainly used up some of my scraps.
We will need an outer fabric. We will need some cotton batting, maybe from an old project. And we will need a lining fabric.
As mentioned before, I will be quilting this wine tote. You don't have to do this. I just think it looks a little nicer and classier. So you may not want to do this step, but if you do, by all means, follow along.
We will need to lay the fabric face down, the batting on top of that fabric, and then the pattern on top of that. We will need to cut around this pattern in a general formation in preparation for cutting. We need to make sure that there is enough fabric and batting all the way around the pattern as shown. This lets us have a little shrinkage when doing the quilting. Once everything is cut, you can flip it over to the right side and pin. As this is a small quilting project, you can just use regular pins. You don't need to use quilting pins or quilting basting glue, anything of that nature.
Some of you might be new to quilting, and I might suggest a check or a plaid, as I've used. It makes it easy just to follow the lines, go diagonally through the dark squares, light squares, whatever your pattern or fabric pattern might be. Once everything's quilted, it's time to place the pattern on top of your quilted fabric.
Once everything is quilted, all you need to do now is place the pattern on the quilted fabric, pin and cut around, and you get this, the dumbbell shape again.
Once you've got the quilted portion cut out, you're going to put that right sides together with the lining.
Take that quilted fabric and place it right sides together with your lining fabric. Again, pinning and then cutting, and again, once again, as always, the dumbbell shape.
Time to get ready to sew.
Now that you have everything pinned together, you're going to sew along these edges as being shown. You only want to sew along these edges to start. This is the neck and the curved area.
This is the only part of the pattern where you'll be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The rest of the pattern is going to be 1/2 inch. Again, this is the only part that you'll need a 1/4 inch seam allowance.
Once you have done the 1/4 inch seam, you'll end up with something like this. Now, we're going to be turning it through that neck. Be gentle when turning, but if you do turn gently, you end up with something like this. Next, we are going to fold the fabric as such. The two quilted sections are now pinned together at the bottom, while the two lining sections are quilted towards the top, or pinned towards the top at least. From this bizarre little sandwich, we're going to cut out 1-inch squares out of the bottom of each area. So from the lining, where the two corners meet, 1-inch squares, and where the quilting sections meet, again, 1-inch squares. Also at this point, you're going to want to mark, or remember, the 3-inch opening you need to leave in the lining fabric for turning later.
Now it's time to sew all the way around our little sandwich, using a 1/2-inch seam.
And this is what we end up with. Here, I have lined up the seams and pinned. This is where we're going to be sewing and giving it a nice boxed bottom. And naturally, as shown, sewing with a 1/2-inch seam to create that boxed bottom. Now, we turn everything through that 3-inch opening. This will encase all the seams inside the wine tote. Do this gently. We do not want to pop any of our seams. And naturally, once you've turned everything out, you're going to want to sew that opening closed. Then, push the lining inside the wine tote, and it ends up looking like this.
It's time to top stitch around the handle section. You could use a decorative stitch if your machine has it. Triple stitch, flower stitch, blanket stitch, stitchy stitch, face work stitch. Any kind of stitch you have. I'm just using a straight stitch.
This is where we're going to be top stitching. We'll be using a 1/4-inch top stitch. This makes it look a little nicer. This is what you end up with after finishing.
Now that it's finished, it's time for fashion show! Wine tote finished? Ready for any picnic that you might be going on? Make a little statement, show off to your guests. I hope you enjoyed this little video tutorial. Please subscribe below. Hit the little bell icon to get notified about my next videos. Leave comments. Did you like this video? Did you not like this video? Do you want to bake a cake later? And again, thanks for watching. Bye now.